Christ, and also our own Imam Shamsuddin Waheed. He'll also be giving an address on the topic that we're discussing today on the Messiah, Jesus. So again, we'd like to welcome you. We appreciate you all taking the time out of your busy day and schedule to be here this afternoon, and we look forward to a continued dialogue as time progresses and goes along. Thank you, and so I won't hesitate, and our first speaker today will be Pastor Heilman.
Shamsuddin, thank you so much for inviting me here today. I thought the learning from Jesus, benefiting from the Messiah. I don't know if you're aware that in the world of Bible publishing, they take Bibles and they take all the words of Christ and they put them in red, so you can find them right away. So I looked for one around the house, couldn't find one. And looked for one around the church and couldn't find one, but sure enough, they were all in black and white. But so I went down to the bookstore, and here they are. And so I'd like to give it from our church to your mosque, to people of God here, from people of God there.
Thank you.
So whenever you want to study Hadith in the name of Jesus, here they are. All right, so that's for you and your community.
Thank you.
And it is an honor to be asked to speak on such an important subject, and I would like to begin with a moment of asking for your forgiveness ahead of time. I might say something today that you find shocking or offensive. It might I might believe in ways that you don't believe. And so if you're a Muslim here, please forgive me. I am just as likely to offend Christians, I think. And so if you are a Christian here today, please understand that I am speaking for myself as how I follow and understand Jesus Christ and history. With that in mind, I'm going to plunge in. I have been given this wonderful long leash to say I can say what and as long as I wish, and I intend to make full use of it, but I do hope to not be just rambling about. Let me tell you, I'm going to begin with just a history. The first problem that the Jewish believers in Jesus faced was the death of Jesus. What was going to happen after his betrayal and public torture to death by the Romans. And that was resolved by the resurrection. This sense that the gathered people of God had that Jesus was not defeated, that Jesus lived on. Now this may have taken many different forms, but this is the foundation of the Christian faith, and that is Jesus died, and yet Jesus lives. The next problem that they faced, this was about 40 years after the life of Jesus, was the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in around 70 AD by the Romans. And this was a horrendous slaughter. Thousands were crucified. You know, the usual rapes, murders, burnings, destructions, thefts of war. And this was memorialized, and you can still see it in some of the Roman architecture about this great victory. I guess it was Titus, I suppose. Maybe Vespasian was there. I can't keep all those Roman emperors straight. But what happened to the Jewish faith then without a temple? Well, Yohanan ben Zakkai was smuggled out of the city while it was under siege in a casket. And usually they tried to kill people who were trying to escape the city, but maybe they had somebody in the guards that was on their side. When he got out, he spoke to the Roman general and was permitted to live and start the rabbinical school in Galilee, from which we get the Jerusalem Talmud. This is the real beginning of rabbinical Judaism. And so for those who look at ancient Judaism with the temple, with all of the ritual sacrifice of the animals, I would say that is radically different than rabbinical Judaism. And the other Judaism that emerged was a Jesus Judaism, people of the way, people who believed that Jesus was the Messiah, the anointed one from God, who lived a life that was so exceptional that they wanted to follow his way, and they continued to do so. This led to great problems, and that was whether Christianity, which we call it now, was going to stay a part of the Jewish faith or become a new religion. And what happened there was basically whether a person had to become Jewish in order to be a Christian, which included things like not eating pork and keeping the Sabbath day holy, and circumcision, which was pretty important to men, about whether that was something that was necessary or not. This was a very difficult time, and we can read about these fights in the New Testament. One Roman Catholic scholar that I read recently says the reason why he thinks Paul and Peter, who were martyred in Rome, are not discussed in the New Testament, even though it was written after that martyrdom occurred, most likely, is because they may well have been betrayed by other Christians who didn't like their kind of Christianity. So this was really resolved by the globalists winning, and the Judaizers, those who wished to keep Christianity within the sphere of Judaism, most of them just, I guess, remained Jews, but those who were Christians reached out and went into the Gentile cities and won converts to the people of the way, the followers of Jesus Christ. And then this was about that time after the passing of the life of Jesus when it became important to the community to remember what he said and what he did, and this is about when the scriptures were written. My understanding, according to David Michael Regler?
Ramsey.
Who knows?
Ramsey.
No, not him. This is the liturgical theory of the New Testament. Basically, the Gospel of Mark was written to coincide with the Jewish time of taking a convert from Pentecost to Passover, and Mark covers from Pentecost to Passover, and the readings of Mark line up with the Jewish liturgical year. And then Matthew was written to cover the entire Jewish liturgical year and holidays, but as a Christian, and explains, and they have different themes, like Mark is just a straight up catechist teaching. Matthew is about law and order, everything makes sense in Matthew. Luke is about social justice, and John is about mystical union with God. As they became more popular in the world, they got noticed. They had to defend themselves against the pagans who were polytheists, who had all kinds of different gods. They had to explain why they believed in one God and would not worship at their temples, and this was considered an act of betrayal to the civic good. It would be like not singing the national anthem or turning around when people do the Pledge of Allegiance and facing your back to it or something. This was seen as an unpatriotic, horrible thing. So sometimes Christians came into great judgment because of their unwillingness to worship the idols of the pagans. But we'll see in the first great pagan, they took things from the pagans as well and ended up using them in Christian services. Candles and incense in temples, and when they carry statues around and feasts and fasts, and some of the holidays, some of those are borrowed pretty much from pagan rituals. The idea was, what can we borrow and still make acceptable to Christians, and what do we just have to say no to? I find it interesting that if you go to Spain, for example, and see them carrying a statue of Mary through the streets, and it could so easily be the same things that they did with a pagan god 3,000 years ago. They were persecuted from time to time, and one of the difficulties was very few people could read and write. And so if they found a person who could read and write, they often made him a bishop. Or a leader of a local church. And those people who could read and write also would have money, likely have a little more money. It took some education then, as it does now, to get an education. So when there were these occasional persecutions, they would try to take the scriptures or take the leadership. And some of them died for their faith, but others didn't. Others said, sacrifice to Caesar? Okay, that works for me. And then later on, when the persecution was over, they said, am I still the bishop? And some people said, no, you aren't. You betrayed God, you betrayed Christ, you're out. And other people said, no, you're the bishop, and that comes from God, so we can't take that away from you, so I guess you still are the bishop. So they had arguments over church leadership. And so the church began to have to organize itself as, and it didn't do that very easily or well. I do want you to understand at this time there were Montanists who still believed in charisma, like the Pentecostals of today, who believed that scriptures could still be coming. The scriptures were not finalized yet. For example, many people still believe that the shepherd of Hermas was a part of the Bible, which later on they said, no, that's not. That said God would only forgive people 490 times, and after that, you're out. They took that from Jesus 70 times 7. And the Donatists of North Africa, much stricter than the others, said if a person recants Christ, he can never be a bishop again, he's out. But we have this story in the New Testament of Jesus, Jesus being betrayed by Peter, and then still being, accepted as a leader. And so there were those who said that even though they were pretty cowardly and failures, they still were our leaders. And this was one of the struggles. There were struggles with a tremendous amount of difference between various Gnostic groups and what later turned out to be the Roman Catholic or more Orthodox group. And that is of particular interest for those of you in the room who are Muslim, because it looks as though there was some Gnostic Christianity. Christianity was no more unified then than it is now. There's all kinds of different beliefs all over the place. And the idea was that some of the people around Medina and Mecca and in that area of the world were not just like the people sitting back in Rome, or even more so in the East. But they began to organize as a religion. And then I need you to understand that globalization is not new. Globalization happened under the Roman Empire. They had the money, they had the army, they went out into the countryside, they bought off people's land by using debt, and they ended up making these giant slave plantations, and then they lived off of the proceeds of these slave plantations like kings and queens back in Rome. This was what the aristocracy did. It was just quite a bit like American Southern slavery, where the rich white plantation owners sat around in Charleston, and they didn't even go out to the swamps where they were growing cotton or something. They sat back in Charleston and drank their mint juleps or something, and they had drivers and managers out there to work the fields. That's what was happening all over the Roman world. These peasants and people who had lived places for generations were driven off their lands into the cities. They couldn't afford. How were they going to make a living? They swamped all of these cities. The density of the ancient cities were greater than New York City. They stacked them up high. And there was disease. There was poor sanitation. There was a tremendous ethnic strife. There was gang fighting. And the idea of life is painful, brutish, and short, or something like that. That was rather true of the city. And so one of the things that happened in the Christian world was to be able to say, in Christ, you are my brother. In Christ, you are my sister. And they became a family for people who had no family, a place where they would get together and have a meal together for people who were hungry, a place where they would look out for each other when they were sick. They would take care of each other. And one of the reasons for the success of the church in the ancient world was not because they were out in the countryside where there weren't too many people. but they were in the big urban centers. That where Christianity was really happening in the early days, where the need was, where people were alone and desperate, and Christianity provided for them a new family. And that was a great, great thing. And one of the reasons why they began to succeed and paganism began to fade was not just the arguing against pagan animal sacrifice or the kind of hard to defend polytheistic idol way, but also this very real community that the church had. By the time of Constantine, he was the first Roman emperor to officially make Christianity legal. He also tried to make it orderly, something that had never been orderly before, and I think he did not succeed, and it's never been orderly since. But he tried. Actually, from what I read in history, Constantine was not as uptight as many of the bishops were. Many of the bishops were more interested in fighting with each other than Constantine. He was kind of like, oh, look, I'm a new Christian. I know I'm the emperor, but he didn't actually say he was a Christian. He didn't get baptized till he was real old. That's part of that shepherd hermes thing. You didn't want to get baptized. You only had 470 strikes and you're out. So a lot of people back then didn't do infant baptism. They did deathbed baptism, because that way you'd be safest. Because the idea was baptism washes the sins away, so you want to wait as long as you can. And you just want to get that right. And so Constantine was like that. Another possible reason was emperors have to sin a lot. And so it might be helpful to save your conversion to as late as possible, which is in fact what he did. But his idea was, can't you guys get along? And apparently the answer was no. They argued, the bishops argued quite a bit. The different church leaders in the East and the West disagreed on a number of things. And one of the things was the deity of Christ. Is Jesus God, like it says in the Blade, or not? And if so, how not? And if yes, then how can there be one God? These kinds of questions. This actually was a debate largely between the Christians of the East, who tended to be followers of, they were led by a man by the name of Eusebius. And they basically were saying Jesus is not God. He's certainly godly, he's certainly godlike, he's certainly divine, he's certainly redemptive, he's certainly truth-talking, but we're not going to put him all the way up to the top floor with God. And they would quote scriptures. And then on the other side was Athanasius of Alexandria, and he was saying, absolutely, he has to be fully God. And he had Greek reasons, Greek categorical reasons why this had to be. And the idea was, I think, among other things, that Jesus was this great bridge between the transcendent and the finite, between the divine and the human, and that in order to have this bridge, he had to be both. So he took this very seriously, and they did take it very seriously, and it tended to focus down on this lowly priest named Arius. Eusebius was the real power of the East, but they all, it's kind of like you have a big brother and a little brother, you fight with the little brother, and so they picked on Arius. He was the one that they all talked about, and Arius goes on a long journey. At one point, Athanasius gets thrown out, and then Athanasius comes back, Arius gets thrown out. Right when Arius is finally going to be accepted into the priesthood, finally his path accepted, he dies. And some people say, see, God didn't even want Arius to be a priest. But other people said, he died of intense and immediate diarrhea, which is a kind of poisoning which is not uncommon in the Roman Empire when they want to get rid of somebody and they use a high-class assassination. So conspiracy theories are not new. They go at least back to Arius. Was Arius murdered, or was it just his day? And regardless of whether Arius was murdered or it was just his time to die, we still wrestle with this question. And so even in the church today, it's not as unified on God as it might always appear. We have Unitarian-type Christians who believe there is just one God and Jesus is a great man but not divine. And then you have other full-bore guys like the guy at Cedar Creek. Jesus is God. Straight up. Say it like that. Woo! And so I'm just telling you this divinity of Christ stuff. Christians didn't just say, is it true? They say, yep, it's true. That's it. Okay, we're settled. No, they fought over this for centuries. And it wasn't really resolved until Basil the Great came up with his great way of trying to describe how the Son is not the Father and the Father is not the Spirit, but they all are God and God is all of them. And he draws this nice geometric thing. Made sense to them, but it's really hard to explain. And in fact, if you try to describe the Trinity, most people who haven't been to seminary don't realize just how difficult that can be without falling into one heresy or another in history. Enough of that. The fall of the Roman Empire was huge for the people of the church. They had become the empire's religion. By Theodosius, he made it illegal not to be a Christian. Tore down pagan temples. The Christians were living the good life. They had Roman Empire temples. They were on the public payroll. They were living it up. And then the Roman Empire crashed in the West, not in the East. And so they had to become German. Because the Germans were coming down from everywhere. Because the Germans were being driven out by, like maybe Huns in the east plus cold weather. And they were coming south. And it was like the snowbirds of the 500 AD time. And 400 AD, a little closer. But down came the Germans. And again, the Christians had to decide, the incense and candles and statues of the pagans that you see in the Roman Catholic Church. In the same way, what are our days of the week? Sunday, Moon Day, Tuesday, Tiu, the god Tiu? How about Woden and Thor, Freya, Saturn? So we, just like we have August for Caesar Augustus and July for Julius, so we've got Roman pagan stuff, we got German pagan stuff. Christmas trees, that's pagan, it's from the Germans. It's kind of nice for me because I'm mostly German. But we were really awful people, I think, too. But I'm telling you that the church went from being down and out and persecuted to all of a sudden being allied with the emperor, and they really got used to this power thing, and now all of a sudden they had to work it with little petty one warlord after another. That's what feudalism really was. It was a bunch of petty warlords that were fighting each other, and each one had their chapel, and they built their cathedrals and did things like that. Well, in the East, guess who comes around? And you know who comes around.
I can make a guess.
622 in our calendar. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he came into history at this time in the East, the Christians basically didn't know anything about it except the local people there. But by the time Umar came around, they noticed. Because everywhere Umar went, Umar won. Umar was a general, and within a very short time, this little group of Muslims from a little backward bit of sand and dirt beat the two largest empires in the world. They beat the Byzantines in the west and the Persians in the east. Everyone was like, who are these guys? Where'd they come from? All right. So I have to talk about Christianity and Islam. This is the part where our histories come together. To you Muslim brothers and sisters, thank you. I really appreciate Arabic numerals. Roman numerals are terrible. There are many, many other things that you gave us. Thank you for Aristotle, Plato. Thank you for giving us our own heritage back to us that we had lost, that you guys saved in Baghdad and in Cordoba and in Alexandria. we Christians and you Muslims, contrary to what you hear, were actually spent more years living in trade and in peace than in fighting one another. This idea that Muslims and Christians are fighting now and they have always been fighting is not true. It's not true. They traded. There was money involved. You know, you want to look the other way. When you can make money and make your family safe and happy, Muslims and Christians were both more than happy to trade with one another and keep relations going smoothly. Muslims were particularly good at this, and in Cordoba in Spain, and in Jerusalem, when Umar conquered Jerusalem, he did not drive out the Christians or the Jews, but let them coexist at that time. All right. So I would say that you gave us Western philosophy, really, leading from the Greeks, Plato and Aristotle. I'm not saying that that Augustine and the early Christian thinkers didn't have them, but I'm saying we went through what we call the Dark Ages, where we did lose touch for a while, and it was through the vibrant Muslim culture, the Islamic culture, and Baghdad at that time was the greatest city in the world. And while the cities of like Paris were like mud streets, in Cordoba, Spain, they would have paved streets and street lights. You know, it was just a different level of culture. And so when someone asks who's ahead in history, my answer is like, it depends on where you cut the snake. You know, if you cut it here, this group's ahead. Cut it there, that group's ahead. Cut it here, this group's ahead. Cut it there, that group's ahead. And history's not done yet, so I just think it's too soon to tell. But thank you. Thank you for all you have brought to our culture. I recommend a book, Islamo-Christian Civilization by Bulliet, B-U-L-L-I-E-T, I think it is. And he shows that just as we talk about Judeo-Christian civilization, we would do well to talk about Islamo-Christian civilization, because Islam is a Western religion in that sense. And that we have gotten as much from Muslims as we have from Jews. And we should recognize that. An example of that that I discovered when reading a book about the history of debt was that even Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, a lot of it is, I would say, almost plagiarized from an earlier Muslim book. There was a lot of Muslim scholarship that just kind of got borrowed right across into the Christian scholarship or the Western scholarship, and there's much of thought that we share. I went to Overmir Anjum's class on Islamic thought, listening to his Muslim philosophers while I had my copy of Tillich's History of Christian Thought in the other hand, and it was marvelous because a lot of the same things that Muslims worried about and thought about were the same things Christians think about and worry about. We have some differences, of course. Well, let me say that there came a big break in Christianity that often gets overlooked, and that was 1054. And I do think this was partly under the influence of Islam as well. In the East, where Muslims were triumphant, and in the West, where Christians were these little petty warlords calling themselves kings or princes running around, the Christians of the East began to look more seriously at some of their idolatry. And they thought that maybe one of the reasons why God was blessing the Muslims and not blessing them so much was all their statues. And so they got rid of them. And they also were able to then to take all of the gold and stuff that was on them. And so the government's got a mix of possible piety, but also maybe a good grab of resources by the government. And in that, they believe that they were able to raise enough money to stave off some of the warfare that happened between Christians and Muslims in their area. I'm going to talk about the Crusades because of this Christian-Muslim warfare thing. Remember I said earlier that Christians and Muslims mostly lived at peace? How long were the Crusades? You know, how many Crusades were there? How big were they? Not that big. I've even heard that there's some Muslim histories that overlook it, because they were so big and so strong, and these little petty kings from France and stuff just were like a little gnat on an elephant, you know, and so it was just like, what happened? So let me say something about the Crusades. The reason why the early Crusades were successful was largely because Muslims were fighting with each other. There was fighting between, what is it, the Umayyads and the Abbasids, or the people of Damascus were very much against the people of Alexandria, the Muslims of one place. And so when the enemy of the enemy is my friend, and so when the Crusaders come down there and they said, we're going to go to Jerusalem and take it back for Jesus, they were like, the people we're fighting run Jerusalem right now. Go ahead. And so the Muslim passed the Christians through. And you Muslims may not like hearing this. And you Christians might not like hearing that we Christians were not all so great and powerful as we thought we were either. But I want you to know that before the Crusaders came, Muslims were fighting Muslims. And after the Christians left, the Muslims were fighting Muslims. And it was no different in Christianity. Our history is one long bloody tale of one kingdom fighting another, one year after another. We even have it in our calendar. We call it March. It means time for war. It's wartime. It's terrible. And it's a disease that affects every religion. So we need to understand that war is the enemy, not Christianity or Islam. We're not enemies with each other. War is our common enemy, and we both have been destroying ourselves plenty without even needing one another's help. I would say that more Christians have been killed by Christians than by any other religion, and probably more Muslims have been killed by Muslims. Think about it. I'm telling you, it's a bloody mess because it's politics and it's power. It's not really religion. Religion gets used. People say, God is on our side. The Nazis had belt buckles that said, God with us on it, I'm told. I don't know if that's true, but it certainly was true in World War I. It might well have been true in World War II. God with us. Okay. So I'm saying everybody uses God. Everybody says their war is a righteous war. Everyone says their war is a holy war. Everyone says the enemy is the devil and doesn't understand negotiation and must be destroyed because that's the only language they understand is blood and violence. That's always the way it is. That's nothing new. And that's true for Christians, Muslims, Jews, Buddhists. I don't care. I don't even give a free ride to the Buddhists. Brian Victoria wrote the book Zenit War, and he showed how the Japanese Buddhists were all right on that let's invade China to bring true Buddhism to them. It's awful. It's awful how religions get appropriated by political and economic powers, and it's our own fight to resist these nationalist and imperial efforts that are done as a form of blasphemy in the name of God. Okay. Now about the Crusades, Muslims coming down and being attacked by Christians. Now, how about the Christians coming up and how about the Muslims coming up and attacking the Christians? Well, of course that happened too. But I want you to understand, everyone was attacking everybody, and once in a while it says, "Oh, you're a Christian. Okay, I'll fight you too." I mean, it just was an accident. It's not that they were really looking to conquer somebody from another faith. They were just going after the next low-hanging fruit they could find. That's what they did in March. Okay, so the Muslims had gone into Spain, and they went over the Pyrenees Mountains just because it was something to do, looking for low-hanging fruit. They weren't trying to necessarily bring Islam to the world. They were just looking for the next place to conquer. It didn't work out so well for them in the Battle of Tours, so they went back, and that was sort of as far as things went there for a while. But on the other side, coming up in through Constantinople, now Istanbul, and up to Vienna, I want to tell you about that one. This was, I remember, 1492. Ferdinand and Isabella had thrown all the Jews and Muslims out of Spain. I want you to understand, when they did that, most of the Muslims were probably wealthy elites that ran the place. All the little people out in their farms, who knows what they thought? I don't really know. But they certainly got rid of the Muslim elites and the Jewish elites, and they got rid of them and ran them out of the country. And I think that was harsh and wrong, but just the same, there was probably, it had more to do with money. If they had found a way to make money off the Muslims there, I'm sure they would have kept them. But it was about this idea of reconquesting Spain as well. Enough about that. Let's talk about the East with Vienna. The reason why I'm saying this is Charles V was the Holy Roman Emperor. He had gotten all that fresh money from Montezuma and the conquest that was going on over here, so he was swimming in money, which basically was being sent through the Muslims to China. That's where the big trade thing went. It went from Christian to Muslim to Confucian, and it was a great thing. But so all this silver that came from those poor people that had it stolen from over here got used by Charles V to raise up a whole lot of armies to do a whole lot of fighting. Well, one of the things that happened in about the 1520s was Martin Luther. And for those of you who are Christians, understand that he is the beginning of Lutheranism. And that is the idea that the Pope was the Antichrist, and this was idolatry, and he was the devil, and there was just no way in God's good earth that we need to be sending our good German money down to those Italians who are trying to sell salvation through indulgences. He was against it. And the local German princes said, keep our money in Germany? That makes sense to me. Plus, selling indulgences and selling salvation sounds like a terrible thing too. They protected Luther. Well, Charles V is just swimming in money. And he's fighting everywhere. But he ends up fighting, I think it was King Francis, one of the French kings, over Milan, I think it was, which they both claimed. The Holy Roman Emperor Charles V and Francis both thought that they owned this little piece, this little city in Italy. Well, Charles V wins, and if I remember correctly, he locks them up in a tower. So it's like a maiden, oh, help, help. Who does he send for help? Who's he going to go for help? He doesn't have Charles V. Martin Luther's just some angry priest up in Germany with a great following, but the German princes aren't going to be able to stand up to all of this might and money that is coming from the New World to finance all of these military armaments that Charles V has. So he sends a note to Suleiman the Magnificent. And he says, Suleiman, help me out. And Suleiman goes, I'm on my way. And in he came. And when the Muslims came up through Suleiman the Magnificent to attack in towards Vienna, Martin Luther said, thank God we're saved. These Muslims are God's way of keeping us alive up here in Germany. Because if it weren't for them, Charles V would come here and wipe us all out. And then I think that Suleiman ended up coming up, I think, and attacking Vienna, I think, 5 times before it was all said and done. It takes time to fight those days. You have to get a whole lot of horses together and things. And this was the beginning of some gunpowder, too. That's an amazing story, but not one that has to do with Islam or Christianity. And but I will tell you that in the end, Vienna did not fall. And they did, in celebration of that, make the croissant or the crescent, which is named after, for the Muslim crescent. So for you Muslims that eat Burger King and you see a croissant, that's a bit of history where Suleiman the Magnificent was not able finally to take Vienna, and the Christians in celebration of holding their city. But it wouldn't have mattered to them really who was trying to take them. They just don't like being taken. No one likes to be defeated in war. But that's where the croissant comes from. But what I want you to know is that the truth of history is that Christians and Muslims have been financially and philosophically cooperative through the vast majority of their history. And the times when they have fought have been the exceptions rather than the rules. And the times when they have actually fought over religion might even be nearly non-existent. it's always about power and wealth, the things that kings march for. And so I would say that even today, if we look at Nigeria, where Muslims are killing Christians and Christians are killing Muslims, I would say that a lot of that is more tribal and about identity than it is actual religious strife. It's about, you hurt somebody, it's the Hatfields and McCoys, but with religious and added to it. In other words, you hurt somebody from my family, I'm going to hurt somebody from your family. And you'll see that the religious differences often fall along tribal lines. And so I see them more as tribal strife that gets an unfortunate religious overtone. And it's very common for the people in power not to say, I'm going to attack you because I can and I want to take your stuff. They'll never say that. They'll say, I'm going to attack you because you hit me first, or you're a very wrong person, or I need to protect somebody. There's always some good reason. But I'm telling you, we Christians and Muslims have lived together in peace. We're still mostly living together in peace, and I think we will live together in peace. And now to the subject of Jesus. Let's go more directly into Jesus now, as a Christian speaking to Muslims and to some Christians in the room. Our sorrow, because we would really like some certainty like you guys have in the Quran. You know, the Quran, every stroke, every line, the same, all around the world. We've got so many different versions and copies and things of the Bible that it's kind of hard to say. So in some ways, our sorrow is that our scriptures are a lot like your study of hadith. We do not have a kind of, even though some preachers may claim so, and if you're in the room here and you claim so and disagree with me, go right ahead. But we do not have the from on high one thing that you have. Let me explain that very quickly. One of the first problems is we don't know what the original texts actually were. They don't exist anymore, so when people are they'll say that the Word of God is inspired in its original autograph, but we don't know what that actual original autograph is. What we do know is that it was copied by hand. There were no Xerox machines. People wrote stuff in, and so there are many, many copying differences. Then you have the translation problem. That's the same thing you have in the Quran. When you speak here in Arabic, it's wonderful if you speak Arabic, but as soon as you try to translate it to English, then it's like, well, you guys that speak Arabic, you have it all up on the other guys, because you can go like, well, if you understood it in the Arabic, there's a certain nuance to it the English doesn't quite have. And we seminarians can do the same thing about Hebrew and Greek. You see, you need to understand what it means to say okay. But so the translation is a problem. So there's copying difference, and I will say, within our scriptures, there are internal anomalies. One time they'll say, that there were 3,000 people at a fight, and the next time they'll say 30,000. They'll say Jesus was buried in this kind of tomb, and then it's a better tomb, and then it's an even better tomb. And so you get these differences in the New Testament. And we have these 4 Gospels that have 4 different ways of telling the story of Jesus. So I'm telling you, it's our sorrow, in a way, that we can't say, we got it right here, and it never changes, and this is it, and we can work from it. And so we don't have that kind of certainty that you do. It's more like the study of hadith. We study, we think that Jesus said this looks like something that's possible. But let me also say that from that desire for certainty, we still can try very hard, either to say the scriptures are our absolute and final and inerrant and infallible rule of faith and practice, something that might be intellectually hard to sustain under study, or we can give it to some guy like the Pope. And we can say, well, the scriptures are not clear, but we have a Pope. And he has been inerrant and infallible when he speaks ex cathedra since Pius IX. What, around the Civil War was that? But the point is, during his, no, I think it was even later. But the thing is, when they did that papal infallibility thing, the first time the bishops got together and voted, they voted it down. And then he did all kinds, it's just an incredible amount of work to get it himself voted in infallible. And I have to say that the desire for certainty is probably a mistake. For us, at least. I'll let you Muslims decide that for yourselves. But where this leaves us Christians in many ways is to, like the Christian existentialist Unamuno, Christian existentialist in Spain during the time of the Spanish Revolution. One of his students said, "You leave me awash in the ocean without even a plank to hold on to." And Unamuno said, "You are a plank." And so the idea is that even though we don't have this certainty, we have God, we have us, we have me, I have me, and it's enough. All right, now I'll tell you our joy. Our joy is that our scriptures are like hadith, because our hands are not so tied to the changes. We don't have to get as stuck in history. We don't have to get as stuck in ancient interpretations. We don't have to see things through medieval eyes. I'm not sure whether that is a struggle in the Muslim faith. I suspect it is. And that the idea of how much new interpretation through context can be given. Is it settled or not? Well, since we don't even have a settled text, we have a lot more room for things like how to deal with women, or homosexuality, or slavery, pacifism. We can interpret things in new ways. In the United Church of Christ, we say God is still speaking. The idea is that we are still not done being reformed. We're still not done with the transformation that the world needs. And so in some ways, the very thing that is a problem for us is also in some ways an asset for us. And that as a Christian, we can say, I am seeking the Holy Spirit of God, and I believe God is leading us to, and then we can move that direction. A bit scary for people who don't think that way. Okay, now about people like Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, peace be upon them all. They live lives that become models for us. So in the Buddha's case, he's the king's son, he's got all that stuff, and he renounces it. He renounces the way of the sword. He renounces the way of the wealth. He leaves the palace. He goes out and studies. He sits under the tree. He discovers the Noble Eightfold Path, and he teaches it for the rest of his life until he dies. And that is a model for a Buddhist. You renounce violence. I'm telling you, the Zen Buddhists didn't do it any better than we Christians necessarily renounce love your enemies. You know, love your enemies, said Jesus. Okay, so I'm just saying we have a really hard time living up to our ideals. So do the Buddhists. Probably Muslims do too. And now let's look at the. Let me just, if I may, for Muhammad, peace be upon him. One of the wonderful things about Muhammad as a model for a person's life is that this man started with like nothing. His mom and dad were dead. He was raised by his uncle, which right there you already have something to learn from. You know, that you should take in your niece and your nephew. God loves them, and you should not leave them out there. You should take them in. And then you can see with this man's integrity that he was a man that people trusted, and that and then when he spent time seeking God out in that cave. You know, so in many ways, isn't he a good model to follow? In the same way, we Christians see Jesus as the model life to follow. And what about the ladies? Where are the lady ones? Let's talk about that one a little bit. But for us as Jesus, let me explain the mythical journey of Jesus to me as a Christian. The first part is incarnation. Incarnation, liberation, confirmation, vindication. It all rhymes. It's a very preacherly thing. The thing is, incarnation, he joined the people. He accompanied the people. He was not a man of the temple. He was a man of the fields and the streets. That's incarnation. And so for me as a Christian, incarnation is to be here with you and to eat with you, my Muslim neighbors. That's the Jesus way, to incarnate, to put your body out there where the suffering is. Not to hide yourself from it. Not to sit back and talk about it, but to join it. And with that incarnation comes liberation. And what I mean by liberation is he was like a living zone of liberation. Wherever he went, there were people that were somehow set free from the things that were trapping them and bothering them and troubling them. And so many people who were outcasts, he accepted them and loved them. He had the lepers, he touched them. He did whatever needed to be done to connect with people. He didn't wait for the Roman Empire to say, or the Jewish establishment to say, it's okay to touch a leper. He touched them. The idea is you don't wait for the world, the better world you hope for to come someday. You just start living it now. And that's what Jesus did. And it was shocking, and it was radical, and it inevitable, and it was beautiful. It was beautiful. It's so beautiful that you can still see echoes of it, I think, today. Whenever someone is incarnated with you, they're really there with you, they're really present with you, then some beautiful liberation stuff happens, doesn't it? It's like some love happens, some connection happens, and it's something beautiful comes forth. And then there's the confrontation. Confrontation is that for Jesus was turning over the tables and the money changers' tables in the temple and taking on this whole animal sacrificial system. And so for him, there were people who benefited from the religious system and the political system, who wanted to keep the separations and keep the way things were. Well, Jesus was, of course, confronted. He was betrayed, tortured, and killed. And I want to talk a little bit more about what the cross means to me as a Christian, if not to all Christians. Definitely not to all Christians. My way might be a bit different. But vindication, and that's the resurrection. And that's not that Jesus, vindicated himself, he was dead. The idea is that God raised him up from the dead. And so even though the world said, you're betrayed, you're tortured, you're dead, you're done, it was like, no, God says, you win. So it's a great, great circle. And the idea is that I, Ed Heilman, need to incarnate myself as a Christian and not just, to be present. And then I, Ed Heilman, as a follower of Jesus Christ, need to be that liberating person, to let my connection with you make it be alive. Jesus said, I came that you might have life in all of its abundance. And then I, as a follower of Jesus Christ, must be willing to take on the injustices where they are, even though that may cost me. To me, that is what Jesus meant when he said you have to carry your cross. And then I, Ed Heilman, have to trust that even though I die, and believe me, I don't even like to stick a thing in my finger, but that trust that God would vindicate me. That's the way of Jesus and the way of the Christian. Not the way we've done it real well, but that's how I see it. Now, so I want to talk about a couple of sacraments on the cross. When John the Baptizer started baptizing people in the Jordan River, after my years of study, we look at baptism as a sacrament for the forgiveness of sins so that God will accept us. And under this original sin idea within Roman Catholicism is that we're all somehow damned to hell unless we're baptized. And even little babies have original sin in them. I do not accept that. I don't accept that. I don't think I have to. I think the missing part of baptism that is most overlooked is that by John taking them to the Jordan River, the place where they first crossed into the Holy Land, that he was reinitiating them into being a new people. It was like 800 years ago when you came in and started killing Canaanites or whatever it was you did to take over this place. You made a mess of it. You've made a real bad mess of it. Let's do a do-over. So let's go back across the Jordan River. Let's get wet again. Let's come in. Let's be a new people and do it right this time. And thank you for that, brother. You will appreciate it. The tie's coming off next.
Hallelujah.
Be careful.
That's right. That's right. All right. Another thing.
Good piece here.
So I'm saying the baptism is not just a sort of like a magical event between us and God, or even just a covenant between us and God. It's also a commitment to be a redemptive people in the world today and do it right this time. The next thing, am I heating up the room or is it just me? All right, the common meal. Jesus had a common meal. Jesus was traveling around places, so he didn't really have a house. so he would go, I'm coming to your house for dinner. He often picked wealthy people, because when Jesus came for dinner, a lot of people came for dinner. And so the idea of Jesus' common meal was he ate with prostitutes, he ate with Gentiles, he ate with everybody. He ate with everybody at a time when everyone else, you didn't want to be with a woman because she might be having her period and make you unclean. You didn't want to, touch this person or touch that because it might make you dirty. Jesus instead of seeing God's holiness or the way of true life as being something that had to be protected from dirt, instead he saw it more as like soap that needed to get out into the dirt. And so he went out wherever. He loved everybody. He restricted it, eating. Everyone was welcome. He was welcome. Everyone was welcome. And so this common meal, which was a sign of the coming realm of God, of the new community on earth, also has become, in some ways, a very private and secret meal, where only the Christians, and sometimes only the Christians of this church and that kind of thing, we're going to eat it. And it's not actually a meal anymore. It's just a little piece of bread or a little sip. And so the Eucharist, originally, I want you to know, started out as a wide open community dinner where rich and poor and black and white and men and women sat down together, and it really freaked people out. And I just want to recall that, because I think that's important and it's what it means to me to be a Christian. Now I want to talk about the cross. I think it was Anselm of Canterbury in the 1200s that really established, I almost wanted to say nailed down, the idea of substitutionary atonement. But the idea of what did Jesus die on the cross for? And did he have to die on the cross? I'm going to explain it how I understand it. And that is, Jesus did not have to die on the cross in order to satisfy an angry God who demanded his son's death. I don't see it that way. I'm sorry if you're a Christian and you do. The way I see it is that this was part of the inevitable confrontation that happens because of his incarnation and because of his liberation. And then the reason why he died on the cross instead of fighting was a moral necessity. It was Audre Lorde who said, you can't use the master's tools to tear down his house. The idea of Jesus, as I understand it, is as you sow, so shall you reap. Love your enemies. Practice what you preach. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. But the whole idea is that you don't make peace by making war. You don't make love by making hate and fear. And so he was not using the tools of domination and oppression that the Roman Empire and every empire uses. He instead just offered himself to take whatever that they could dish out, because he was just doing what was the right thing. And thanks be to God for the vindication. But it was a necessity, because to do anything less, to take up the sword, in his case, I'm not speaking of Moses or the prophet Muhammad, but in Jesus' case, I will certainly say it was wrong. Because the way he taught and the way he lived was not the way of conquering through force, but by setting up an alternative community of love. And it was not his way to kill. So inevitably, he was killed. So for me, that's the necessity of the cross. It was a moral necessity. It was a sowing as you reap. It was a Jesus being true to what he taught, and he lived it to the end. It's like, sure, you can talk the talk, but can you walk the walk when skin is in the game? Can you walk the walk when you're going to be betrayed? Can you walk the walk when you're going to be tortured, when you're going to be made fun of and spat on, and you're going to be publicly humiliated, the naked hanging on the cross, that whole part which we also overlook. We very politely do that. But it was one of the three ways that the Romans destroyed people. They fed them to lions and stuff, because that destroyed the body. They burned them alive like Nero did to Christians, because that destroyed the body. And they crucified them, because that destroyed the body. The idea was not just to kill a person, but to kill him deader than dead. You know, just bones and everything. Birds eat the eyes. They usually let people hang on the crosses for a long time. Although there is evidence that sometimes people were taken down early from the cross like Jesus was. They did find the ankle bone of somebody who had been crucified a few years ago, and it was through the side of the ankle with a piece of wood on it so that you couldn't pull out. Nasty business, crucifixion. But the Romans were trying to show everybody who was boss. All right. So that to me is the necessity of the cross. It was Jesus being true to everything he said and did and lived. It was the logical conclusion to where that leads. And I would suggest this is why Jesus tells us Christians that when we are to take up the cross, it means the same thing. We are to take the consequences of trying to change the world, trying to speak the truth. All right. I want you to understand this, those of you who are Muslims, if you don't, and those of you who are Christians, that I'm not even allowed to take communion in a Roman Catholic church. And I'm not allowed in the temple of the Mormons out in Utah. And there's probably quite a few Christians who won't even think I'm a Christian at all, because I'm not believing things the right way, and it doesn't, and no amount of talking is going to convince them any different. So I want you to know Christianity is a very diverse group, and when the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholic Church separated in 1054, it wasn't pretty. They both excommunicated each other and damned each other to hell, and I think they're still in that position to this day. But so am I. By Roman Catholic law, my marriage is illegitimate. My children are bastards. I am, outside of the faith, even after Vatican II. So here's a little bit more of the specifics then about Jesus. I think I'm down to the end of that. That's my history and rundown. Let me get to the more of Jesus in the Bible. In the beginning of each of the Gospels, it gives a really heads up. And I've been going on for a long time. An hour?
Yeah.
An hour?
Yeah.
Oh, Lord, I have to stop.
Stop for dinner.
I'll make this as absolutely fast as I can. Matthew, Mark, and Luke say that it was about the king. Jesus is about the kingdom of God. John says it's about mystical union. Some of the things we see from Jesus, radical egalitarian. Everyone is equal. He said, you're not to be called rabbi or to have one teacher, and you are all students, and you're called no one father on earth, for you have one Father, the one in heaven. You are not to be called instructors or rabbi. You have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you must be your servant. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. I want you to understand Jesus is the anti-Caesar. Next thing, he was against greed and he was for sharing. One of my favorite texts in the New Testament. Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions, give alms, make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, then your heart will be also. And so the early church, according to the Gospel of Luke, Acts, lived in a kind of family primitive communism. They shared stuff together. I don't mean they shared their wives. I mean they shared their food and they shared housing and they took care of each other. Women in Jesus, they often are the ones that get things right. In text after text, the men get it wrong, the women get it right. In text after text, where Jesus gives a parable referring to men, like the shepherd and the sheep, then he gives a one about the women and the coin. So I want you to know the New Testament and Jesus is very feminist. It's very woman positive. And that's why there's even a woman apostle in the letter from Romans. And so this idea that women can't have authority in the church is not my belief at all. And all-inclusive love, Jesus said our love should not just be like the bean counters, the accountants that see I'm tit for tat, butter for fat, kill my dog, kill your cat, back and forth. Instead, it's he said, you heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say to you, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be the children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. The Greek word there is teleos, all-inclusive, grown up, complete. It's saying, just like God sends the sun and rain on everybody, that's the way your love should be. It should be complete. It should have no end. Everybody's in. The golden rule is a summary. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. When he was asked which commandment is the greatest of all, he said, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might. Love your neighbor as yourself. When it came, and this is why we get to eat bacon, you Muslims and any Jews in the room. This is why I get to eat a ham sandwich. Here it is. It says, do you fail to understand? Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile, enters not the heart, but the stomach, and goes out into the sewer? And then Mark says, thus he declares all food clean. And he said, it is what comes out of a person that defiles. It is from within, from the human heart, that evil intentions come. Fornication, theft, murder, adultery, avarice, wickedness, deceit, licentiousness, envy, slander, pride, folly. Foaming at the mouth. All these evil things come from within, and they defile a person. He also had some teachings about divorce, and I don't have time for that. But what's our relationship to other religions, and I'll stop there. I am sorry. Next time just slap me or get a little light.
Just give you 2 hours.
Yeah. Let me just say this. He really doesn't say anything about it. And basically, what he did was he just loved everybody. And he never seemed to actually really try to convert anybody to becoming Jewish. So he dealt with pagans, and he didn't say, you need to become Jewish. He just seemed like he just loved everybody. So I give that. I will tell you that he nearly got thrown out, according to the Gospels, he nearly got thrown out of Nazareth, his own hometown, and killed, because he talked about how God loved Naaman the Syrian more than he loved the Jewish people and the widow of Sidon. And so Jesus' love was not trapped by tribalism and nationalism. He had a bigger view. And he also said that many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not do this and that? But he'll say, depart from me, I never knew you, you who practice lawlessness. And so I would suggest that Jesus looks at the heart, and that what we're doing today is a good thing.
Amen.
So thank you.
Now we got to get ready for my talk, but I'm not going to. Anyway, so
sorry, brother.
Anyway, so we really appreciate what Pastor Heilman had to say for us this afternoon, and I'm not going to take any more time, but I'm going to introduce Imam Shamsuddin Waheed. He's going to be finishing up the program. And if you haven't noticed, you have an index card that we gave you when you came in, and a pen, and that was for the Q&A portion after his speech. And hopefully we'll still have time to entertain a few questions. But I don't know, it's going to be up to Imam Shamsuddin how the program is going to conclude. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. Good afternoon. I should say that as a Muslim Imam, I have no choice but to speak according to a schedule. Because the Muslim Sabbath, for lack of a better expression, is on Fridays. And Friday is a work day. So here, for example, we have Friday prayers from 1:30 to 2. If we go